Dalton Risner is visiting with the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to be breaking that down on today's edition of Vikings Now. Then we're also going to be diving into the NFL Top 100 rankings as Kirk Cousins. Is he finally getting respected as he found himself in the top 50 of that list? Then we'll close out today's show talking about Andrew Booth Jr. As it turns out, he has been absolutely turning heads so far at Minnesota Vikings training camp, and could he potentially take over Byron Murphy as cornerback number one for Brian Flores' defense? My name is Patrick Siepman. Welcome to the Vikings Now by Chat Sports. And before we hop into the latest around Dalton Risner, if you want the Minnesota Vikings to sign Dalton Risner, show me. Give me a like on today's video. Let's show some support for the men in the trenches. And I want Dalton Risner on this team. And if you do too, hit that like button right now. Now let's talk about it. The report came out yesterday, late afternoon, that Dalton Risner is visiting with the Minnesota Vikings. We'll be diving into the report and all this and more, but it did come from Rap Sheet, as he was the one that did break the news. As he said, some offensive line help on the way to Minnesota. He says, source says that former Broncos guard Dalton Risner is on his way to visit the Vikings, potentially filling in a need into training camp. Risner has started 62 games over the last 4 seasons for Denver and is the top offensive lineman available. And I agree with Rap Sheet. Dalton Risner is the top offensive lineman available. And we all know the Minnesota Vikings. They have had a need at the interior of the offensive line for years now. Like, I always feel like that's the kind of number one need heading into the offseason is like, hey, protect Kirk Cousins because he doesn't handle pressure well up the middle. Well, Dalton Risner could help with that. Last season, he ranked 42 out of 77 offensive guards, according to PFF. His overall PFF grade was 61.1, had 1 penalty last season, and did allow 3 sacks. But how the Vikings offensive line shakes up right now, I do have this as the starting 5 unit. We do know Darrisaw and O'Neal, they'll be holding down the tackles positions for the Vikings for the near future. But then it's that guard spot that gets a little tricky. Right now, I do have Ezra Cleveland as the starting left guard, and then Ed Ingram, the second-year guard out of LSU, he is set to be the starter at right guard. But I do want to say this to all the Vikings fans, to kind of something to keep in mind. Ezra Cleveland, coming out of the draft, was a left tackle out of Boise State. And then the Vikings, obviously, since they had Darrisaw, they moved him in, and they had him starting to play left guard. And let's just say that the Vikings do bring in Dalton Risner and have him start at left guard, which apparently the reports are coming out that they are fully confident and fully happy with Ed Ingram at right guard, so Risner will most likely be the starting left guard. The Vikings could trade Ezra Cleveland to a tackle-needy team who potentially could look at him and say, you know what, maybe the Vikings had him out of position. Let's trade for him, and maybe he could be our franchise left tackle. Because we have seen the improvement year after year with Ezra Cleveland. Just according to PFF, his PFF grades over the first 3 years of his career have gone up every year. But we all know the problems with Ezra. It's a roller coaster with him. It's every week is a different story. It's one week, oh, he is balling out. He looks like the next Quentin Nelson. And then the next week, he's getting dominated by a guy like Kenny Clark or Akeem Hicks in the division. So overall, Ezra Cleveland, he's had an up and down start to his NFL career. I would still assume that he is the starting left guard for the Vikings week 1, but we have seen the improvement. Obviously, the PFF grades climbing up here little by little every year, and this past year was his best year according to PFF. 73.5 overall grade. He did allow 5 sacks. He was a lot better in the run game than he was in comparison to pass protection, which is normally the case with interior offensive linemen. But if you guys had the choice, if you're Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and you're sitting up there, or you're Kevin O'Connell and you have to pick your left guard for next season, give me an EC for Ezra Cleveland, or give me a DR for Dalton Risner. This will be the pinned comment on today's video. So if YouTube throws an ad break your way, answer today's pinned comment. Pick a starting left guard for the Minnesota Vikings. Now let's talk about Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, is he finally getting respected by the rest of the NFL? They have been coming out with these top 100 lists for the past many seasons. And Kirk found himself 42nd on these rankings. Let's clap it up to Kirk. Last year, he was 99th on this list. But after leading the Vikings to 13 wins with having one of the worst defenses in the NFL last season and with a pretty piss-poor rushing attack, Kirk Cousins found himself at 42nd overall, which was actually 6th amongst all quarterbacks in the top 100, and I think for right reason. We all know from a production standpoint, Kirk has been one of the best over the past 4 years in the NFL. And his numbers last year, I think, do back it up with his ranking in the top 100. The completion percentage has always been Kirk's calling card, always a very accurate quarterback, and especially he has time in the pocket and he has a clean pocket. He can really set his feet and deliver a strike to his wide receivers. But a 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, always solid for Kirk. And his 4 years in Minnesota, I mean, the thing that stands out to me, like I just said, the touchdown to interception ratio. I mean, almost 30 plus the last 3 seasons with keeping the interceptions in check as well. I think Kirk was one of the more underrated guys in the league last year, and he set a record for most fourth quarter game winning touchdown drives as well last season. And I expect a big year from number 8 for the Minnesota Vikings. This is the first time since his days back in Washington that Kirk has had the same play caller in back-to-back years. Now you may say, well, he had the Kubiaks for 2 years in Minnesota. Yeah, we're going from his dad to his kid. It's just not really the same. Maybe terminology will be the same, and maybe some of the certain scheme will be the same. But this is the first time that he is under the same play caller and same coordinator for the first time since he came to Minnesota. So I do fully expect Kirk to have a big year. And just with the addition of Josh Oliver, Jordan Addison replacing Thielen, just adding another shifty receiver in there. And then, hey, you can always count on Justin Jefferson to be a little better each and every year. And actually, Chris Carter actually had a cool quote about that. And he said Jefferson is even better than he was last year. So I expect big things from Kirk Cousins this year. I think statistically, we're going to see one of the better years of his NFL career. Let's show him some love. Kirk Cousins, he gets disrespected amongst NFL media members. Just the typical casual eye, the untrained eye fans in the NFL. Type his jersey number down in the comment section and show our quarterback, show QB1 some love. So Andrew Booth Jr., apparently he has been turning heads at Minnesota Vikings training camp, and he has been actually balling out. In the first day of training camp, he found himself on the second unit of the secondary in 7-on-7 drills. It's actually Joejuan Williams who got those kind of CB2 looks at first. But Andrew Booth, he's taking control of those CB2 reps, and he actually had a sweet interception against Justin Jefferson. He actually jammed him at the line of scrimmage, got really physical with him, kind of fitting into that Brian Flores play style, and he had a sweet interception. Jefferson was running a hitch on the wide side of the field, came back to it, Booth jumped the route, had the interception. It was actually a pretty sweet play for the young kid out of Clemson. But as the Vikings, as their kind of cornerback group, the way it shakes out right now, and, obviously I have Byron Murphy as a CB1 as of right now. We'll get into him in a second. But it comes down to that CB2 and CB3 for the Vikes. Right now, I do think it's Booth and Evans, week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But you never know. It could be a guy like Tay Gowan, Kalen Barnes, Joejuan Williams, who I just mentioned, who was getting first-team reps at the beginning of training camp. Then even a guy like Mekhi Blackman, who Brian Flores has been absolutely raving about ever since the Vikings took him in the 3rd round of this past year's draft. But I do want to make this point. I do think cornerback 1 is wide open. Obviously, Byron Murphy right now is the most accomplished and probably the most talented corner out of this grouping so far. But that doesn't mean the door is shut. I don't think this means that a guy like Evans or Booth, if they kind of take that jump next season, that they couldn't overtake Byron Murphy as cornerback 1, because frankly, he's looked all right. He's looked kind of mess so far during training camp. A clip that kind of went viral on Vikings Twitter was it was a one-on-one rep versus Jefferson. He broke him on an out route and left him in the dust, and he was on the floor, and everybody was kind of saying like, oh, Justin Jefferson, he's so good, he's so this. I was looking on the other side of things. I was like, why did Byron Murphy just get absolutely embarrassed? And I get it. Justin Jefferson, most corners in the NFL are going to get embarrassed, but I don't want a cornerback 1 looking like that against number 18. So I do think cornerback 1 completely open on this group. Could be Booth, could be Evans. I do think so far at the beginning of the year, it will be Murphy week 1 against Tampa Bay, but who knows? Maybe Booth or Evans takes that next step. But I'll ask you guys, who will be cornerback 1 for the Minnesota Vikings next season? I think we all kind of assumed it was going to be Byron Murphy heading into camp and heading into the season, but obviously everything can change. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Who will be CB1 for the Vikings next season? As always, guys, thank you guys so much for watching Vikings Now by Chat Sports. We're ramping up our coverage here with the NFL season just around the corner. And shit, we got preseason football this Thursday. Who would have thought that? So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. Lock us in. Any news and rumors around the team, we'll keep you covered. As always.